we met through the book club.
That feels like so long ago, right? Last year.
I'm not sure if it's frozen.
How is it now?
We are back.
Okay. There's a level of commitment when you actually go into an immersive space. You're already signing up to be fully immersed in this thing. For creators of the content, that's a huge consideration. And you can't necessarily control where the viewer's head is going to be looking. But there are ways you can. Now you're getting into like different storytelling techniques, sound cues, visual cues, when to cut. We've seen many different attempts at this. I think it's a very good challenge for filmmakers, storytellers, because it makes you think very, very differently about how you might want to communicate a scene or a narrative.
Not only from the interaction side and gamification, but the tracing your part of the community of this specific IP.
What you're speaking to is like that direct-to-fan engagement. IP development in web3, if it is done right, I think it does allow creators to build a really good fan base, like from the beginning.
And we want to be interested, and we found that if we're interested in what we're talking about, usually it's interesting for other people as well. I would love to hear also about your plans with your podcast, or maybe what did you find was missing in the space?
So I wouldn't say it's dedicated to Web3, first of all. But there are some things that I feel like are potentially missing, or there's a crossover with, if we want to just say Web2 for now, right? I started this podcast because I feel like there's a need for some of these less tutorial based conversations in the design, art, graphic design communities, right? This is where I'm sort of focusing first, where there's a lot of podcasts and a lot of conversations that teach you maybe how to be a good designer, or teach you how to use the software or the hardware, or learn CG or learn Photoshop, right? And there's a lot of that out there. And I think I've reached a kind of section in my career, or a moment in time, where I've realized, okay, that's great, and that helps you definitely, especially at the beginning, where you're trying to be the best creative you can be. But there's a lot of, I would say, like softer skills, interpersonal skills, that you're not taught these things in school, and you're kind of learning these things along the way. There's many considerations outside of just being an artist and a designer that help you, especially if you're trying to go into more of a creative leadership role. And that's why I say there's soft skills, like there's reputation equity is what, like, my first actually episode is all about. It'll be all about reputation equity and how you maintain your reputation, how you port your reputation from place to place, right? What is it like when you've moved from another country to come to another location that's unfamiliar? People I know have done that with kids, very young kids. And what happens when you're married and your wife can't work, and you're the one that's working, you're the one with the green card, you're the one that's actually being able to like go out, and like what kind of burden does that have on the relationship? Practicing as a creative, practicing as a designer, but what does it really take to be a professional creative underneath the hood, and the conversations that don't necessarily happen on the surface?
I think it's amazing because as a person who, well, first of all, changed a lot of times the different directions, like we're working in, and then countries that I'm living in, I like initially I'm trained as a doctor, and it's kind of like completely different world at how it felt initially, and when you go somewhere else, you think like, did I just waste my years of my life and it has nothing to do? And it's like learning how do you take the experiences that you acquired there and then kind of like repackage it. It's like it comes less about the hard skills like I need to learn, and it's more about the soft skills and how do you present yourself, how do you even learn yourself, how can you tap into what you already, the baggage that you kind of like acquired, and bring it to the new place, and then like changing countries and stuff.
It's more about if I was to summarize it, it's the human side of creativity. It's not the finished product. It's not the title sequence, the commercial, the whatever you might be putting out, right? Like the film. It's not that. It's what goes into that and how that affects you. I've been fortunate enough to be very close to people who have been building, very big things, and who have sustained them as well. But being able to see the toll that takes on them. And somebody really close to me said, like, he had investors and they told him, look, you're not going to be able to please everyone in your life at the same time. You're not going to make us happy all the 100% of the time, so don't try and do that. Whereas he might have felt that pressure to always I have to make my investors happy, I have to make them happy. Like they said, they were honest with him, there's going to be some times when we're going to be mad at you, and that's just what it is. There's going to be times when, your girlfriend or your wife is mad at you because you're giving us the attention right now. There's going to be times when your employees are mad at you, right? Because now your attention is not on them and it's in these 2 or 3 other places. And even that, kind of showed him or taught him a lesson where, like, look, okay, I have to be forgiving on myself, and hopefully the people around me can also be forgiving, because I'm not going to be able to always be 100% for everyone at all times.
It reminded me one of your posts that I saw, which is, as you were talking about the leadership, about the decision of making this move from creating something that you personally want and going to the leadership position where you now thinking more about what you can do together with a team.
Yeah.
Would you say it follows into what you were describing right now, like even on the example of this person?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yes, I think it does fall in line with that, because early stage career, you're focused on creating the best art possible. You might be doing, storyboard frames and sitting there for hours trying to perfect this 1 or 2 storyboard frames to communicate your idea. But it's not necessarily scalable to be able to, go down the path of leadership necessarily, because you have to be able to see the bigger picture, and I think have that vision and be able to lead people towards that vision as well. And so I call that, like, it's almost like a creative hard fork, isn't it? Where the time comes where you have to sort of decide, am I going to stay on the box, on the computer, and keep creating? Or am I going to go down this level of art director, creative director, and start to lead teams? And that's a very tough part of a creative's life, like decision. It happened to me, and I thankfully the person who hired me gave me gave me some very good advice and mentorship as well, and wasn't trying to just push me into one path or the other, but just gave me some considerations to think about, right? And he pretty much laid it out, like, he's like, your value to me, where I see you can go with leadership, you're more valuable to me to be able to lead people with the vision that you have, and be able to know and understand how to get good work from people.
What would be your opinion, about the immersive content creation?
I do think we're at a stage where there's an intersection of many different avenues of storytelling, right? Like next generation storytelling, whether it's how IP is being created in web3, and then there's the kind of introduction, or not even introduction, it's been around for a while, but like, immersive storytelling. I think when you put on a headset and you watch a piece of content, there's that real feeling of presence now. There's that heightened level of presence, that heightened level of awareness, like you're hyper focused on everything that's in your peripheral, right? And I think there's that added layer of how does it make you feel? And you can say that exists on on a flat 2D plane watching something. It does evoke emotion if it's on a 2D screen, or if you're in a movie theater or at home. But when you are considering even creating content in this space, you have to really think about how does it make you feel? The distances from people, from objects, because you're actually there, you are the camera, right? Like you're looking left and right. And I think for creators of the content, that's a huge consideration. Like it's a much wider viewing angle, and you can't necessarily control where the viewer's head is going to be looking. But there are ways you can. There's different ways. Now you're getting into like different storytelling techniques, like sound cues, visual cues, where to look, when to cut. I think you'll get into thinking about traditional filmmaking and traditional storytelling. Maybe that won't translate. I mean, we've seen many different attempts at this over the years of trying to tell stories in this space, and I think it's a very good challenge for filmmakers, storytellers to experiment in this medium, because it makes you think very, very differently about how you might want to communicate a scene or a narrative.
What we consume is linked to the devices we consume it with. Actually, my partner wrote a manifesto for the post-screen era, and it was interesting that how our perception of everything that's digital will be changed once the devices change.
The way that you do consume, it's like, you're using your phone, and I think over the years it's become, the consumption level is, escalated dramatically. And we all know the same conversations with attention spans, and, the way that you can just quickly flick through content and scroll through content now. I think perhaps if you're looking at ways to tell stories in a space where you're actually there, it's going to potentially slow you down. There's a level of commitment when you actually go into, I would say, an immersive space. You're already signing up to be fully immersed in this thing.
If you used to play games, there is something that is, scripted, you have to do something. But I always loved to explore something outside of it.
Yeah.
And you always hope that this something is interactive. And I just imagined how maybe even complex the storytelling will become, or even even maybe more playful and gamified, because you can hide some Easter eggs there when somebody just goes there and starts exploring while things are the main plot is happening over there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we've seen it yet. I think it's such early development, and I think it's going to enhance creativity, definitely. And I don't know, does it replace the 2D flat screen? Don't know. Can they coexist? Probably. I don't think we have the answers yet.
What about the blockchain? Do you think it has a role in it? Because I don't know if you know about John Rogers. He used to be in the franchises side and on Disney. With the overpriced JPEGs, they did a series of episodes called Blockbusters, and they were talking about how Disney and other storytelling companies can use the blockchain. And there is a term that they use, which is
a theme park on the blockchain.
Yeah, theme park. How they, at least he was kind of speculating, obviously, but how as you're watching, even on the flat screen, how you potentially can stop it. And if not crypto, but NFTs are part of creating the product from the scratch, right? Which I kind of really like this direction. When not just you're adding it as the afterthought of, hey, we have a characters, now collect something, but actually it becomes the integral part of when you're creating a story, and when you're laying out the whole strategy, how it's going to, go to market, and how people can interact with it. If there's going to be an immersive parts, and let's say something like that, as we imagine right now happens, how this can be on the chain straight away, and how it can influence not only from the interaction side and gamification, but the tracing your part of the community of this specific IP from the beginning.
Just observing what's been going on in Web3 with companies that have created IP from scratch. I think that what you're speaking to is that direct-to-fan engagement, which I think is something that is very prevalent and very present, and we see it every day right now, right? With this, I think if Web3, IP development in Web3, if it is done right, I think it does allow creators to build a really good fan base, off the jump from the beginning. Although versus traditionally building an audience in the way that we think about it is, you're gonna create a franchise or create an IP, you're gonna put it out there, and if it doesn't have a legacy, or if there's no book, or there's no kind of a traditional fan base associated with that IP that's being converted to a film or TV show. And I was very close to this process with a really good friend of mine who was building IP in Web 2, And you create a script, there's a level of world and character development, and you have to finance that. If you don't have funding, you have to pitch those scripts, pitch your ideas, and hopefully get funding, or a studio says, yeah, okay, we want to green light this, or you sign to a talent agency, and then you've got more people that are involved in trying to get your IP sold to distribution, or for distribution, or to a studio. And if no one bites, you're typically not going to move the content in the way that you desire to. And there's only so many studios around. There's obviously more now with streaming. What that process is like. So for people that have good ideas, that are trying to pitch, some of them you may get left out in the cold. And not to say that Web3 is a solution where everyone now is going to be able to start building their IP. But I think it's a really interesting concept where you can start to build a fan base in the beginning. And I don't think you're fully exempt from any of this, in that kind of Web3 approach. But I think we have seen a couple of companies, right? A couple of brands that have been able to raise a considerable amount of capital and have been able to produce their own content with those funds. And we do know that there are fan bases out there that are willing to be very loyal, travel to in real life events, and really start to understand the brand and the creative process from the beginning. Any opportunity to have an alternate way to produce your IP and get your ideas out there, and if Web3 mechanics actually enable that, I think that's a great thing.
I was just reading a lot about shows that were saved solely by fan efforts, or like mainly by fan efforts, and the power they actually have when they come together. And so I think this shows that fans are extremely dedicated and they have a way to organize themselves. So maybe the next step will be that Web3 could bring is something like better financialization, better finance structures, like finding a way to raise money together and organizing yourself better as a fan community, almost creating this fan union for a show that if it, for example, gets discontinued, what are the ways we can either raise money to continue it, or how can we maybe even acquire the IP and create our own. So I think that's really interesting. It could be explored with Web3.
Having that direct connection with your fans and seeing how they are engaging with your products after, let's say, like the point of sale, and understanding what are the movements and activities of said fans. If they wish to disclose that, what breadcrumbs you want to leave.
I think, like crypto and NFTs just generally kind of give the more opportunities to explore even if you have funding and stuff, as you said, like interactions and how fans interact with it. And I think we already see it in the NFT space. Like there is a couple of projects that are kind of trying to tap into how people interact with your content online, how they interact with it in the physical world, if they have the physical things, and it's shipped with NFT things, and how all these different cross-platform and cross-reality things can be gathered to understand better your user, customer, fan community. And back to the question, I was like about the distribution. When we talk about sales and analyzing fans, it means that you already have your base, but you have to build it to get to this point. And I think something that you mentioned, about how creators first creating scripts and getting funds, there was also independent creators that are doing the same things on social media, right? When they're creating the characters, and then sometimes they just have just an illustration, kind of like a meme, or it might be a little bit of animation. And there is one project, it's called Invisible Universe. They're actually creating characters. I don't know if you know about them, but they're creating characters with their personalities, and they're basically social media personas. And they're running their own accounts. And what they're doing is bits by bits giving information about these characters. And they're completely unrelated to each other. They have completely different words. You can start maybe from these bits of creating the IP, creating the fan base, and then maybe move into the long form, maybe it's animation, or maybe they will never go there, I don't know. maybe this is how it's going to be, the future of short-term content.
Just bite size, right? It's a way to sort of for people to experiment with short form and do character development at a smaller scale. Less of a commitment up front, and also test. It's like you go to some comedy shows and comedians will be they'll be testing their jokes and on the way to let's say the bigger stage, and seeing what works along the way and what doesn't.
If you were to come up with your own show, how would you go about it?
I don't know if it's solved yet, honestly. Like, I think we're still in experimental phase. So to answer that question, I do have ideas that I have been playing with more on the film side than like a TV content series. There's some principles that you just can't get away from, that regardless of whether you're going to try and do it with some web3 NFT mechanics, fundraising that way, or you're going to do it the traditional route, you still have to make sure that you have a good idea, a good story, something that's relatable, who's your target audience. Like, there's so many different things that you have to consider that you still have to do that legwork up front. I think when it comes to like distribution, I don't know. Like, that's a tough question, because I might be a little biased to see, in terms of my answer, because I've seen what that does take to try and get your film or your TV show financed. And the process of, I guess, like, once it does get financed, like, how much control do you have if you're getting your show financed by a larger studio? And I think many different studios have many different kind of ways of doing that, right? Some may want more control than others, and then does your idea remain your idea, or does it get adjusted to fit said studio's language, right? So yeah, I think as a creative, you want as much control as possible. I think that this new way of actually getting your content out there and getting your content developed, as we have seen recently, does give you an element of control. And so I probably would explore ways where I could retain more of the essence of what I started out, or what I set out to do, but also speaking to the iterative process. We always be testing along the way. We have the internet now. We have methods of getting your creativity out there and getting people to see it and to give opinions. And I think that's something that we never had before. But in terms of like how I would go about it, I think I would still start with and continue to retain those foundational principles of developing your ideas.
Speaking about tapping into audiences, are you part of any fan communities? Are you a hardcore fan in something?
Am I a hardcore fan? It's interesting, like growing up, funny enough, I never really was really like a hardcore, like I would say I was like really hard, like into Star Wars, or like really like a hardcore fan. I always just really appreciated like really good story and cinema, right? If we're talking about entertainment. So I feel like I'm pretty neutral, on that. I love like certain TV shows, certain films. I will go and watch every single movie made by certain directors, right? I don't care what it is, I'm gonna go, because I appreciate the craft of what goes into making their films, and if I like the style, I'm gonna be sort of like a fan towards the filmmaker.
Because
Have you been Pao?
Sorry?
I was asking her if she had ever been someone's hardcore fan. I wasn't either.
I was actually.
Yeah. Who?
There was a band. It was a German like pop rock band. Oh my god, this is gonna be funny. But I used to be a Tokyo Hotel fan. It's like this. I think you know Taco, no? Did I tell you?
But I didn't know you were a hardcore fan.
I was a hardcore fan. Like I was like very convinced that I was gonna marry the lead singer. There was some other like things that I was really a fan of. For example, an author that wrote a few books about like there's a dragon and there's a boy and they kind of run away together or something like that. And I was always a huge fan of like birds and dragons in stories. So there was a time when I was consuming everything that just included these type of characters.
And anything now?
Now, I'm not really a fan of any specific character or a specific type of content. I'm more a fan of specific communities. And what makes me a fan of these communities is not really a specific character or IP, the community vibe and like the feeling that I get when I'm part of the community. What communities are you part of and why?
As time goes on, what I predict is that, you know, your identity in real life and your identity online it's just getting further and further intertwined, right? Or at least for me, I've been thinking about it for the last year or so, even a little bit before that, to ensure that we treat both of our kind of identities with the same level of respect, no? And so then if you're thinking about community and what that means, it's kind of where, if you think about in real life, you have friend groups and you only have a certain amount of time and a certain amount of energy to spend with said friend groups or people. And so if I think about that concept and I take that online, I think it's the same thing, right? It's like I want to be communicating with and surrounding myself with people who have that level of integrity. And I do see it as a two-way channel, like a two-way street where one can enhance the other. Like your in real life presence can enhance your online life, and your online life can enhance your in real, you know, your real life, physical life. Putting a huge emphasis on identity through whether it's avatar, PFPs, whatever it might be in the future, you really have to acknowledge that. I think we're in a very critical time.
How do you manage and curate it? Like, what are the principles behind it? Like, what's...
Being in the Web3 space, it was funny, like, you know, everyone started to use PFPs and illustrations to represent themselves, and whether you're doxed or you're undoxed, right? I did think, okay, like reputation is and association is huge. And so in real life, and so taking those principles online, and I wanted to make sure, or I do try to aim to the best of my ability to associate myself with good company, right? And, you know, we can get it wrong sometimes, like even, you know, in real life, you know, you may, you know, you meet certain people, you may find out later on maybe it's not the right person that you should have, you know, built a friendship with, or whatever that happens. It's life. But I think that, I think with this space you have the opportunity to at least do some homework. And if you just observe for a while and understand what the community is about. Personally, I wanted to join a community of like-minded people. I did choose punks at the end. And I did that for a few reasons. Just, you know, artwork itself, you know, was definitely attracted my eye. I'm, you know, graphic designer by trade, my background. And so I do appreciate simplicity and finding beauty in simplicity and things that I believe are timeless. And so if I, you know, keep that common thread, or I try to keep that common thread through my own work, things that are simple, look simple, but then the further you go down the rabbit hole, you start to see all of these beautiful complexities that surface once you start really doing your research and your homework. And I felt like, I don't know if you experienced this too, but there's this really strange phenomenon that happened when I was searching for my PFP. You're looking at the artwork, and then it starts to become really obsessive. Like, you know, you start to look at the traits and what represents me, and I got like you go down this like spiral of just, you know, looking at these traits, what they mean to you, how do they represent you, and it can be kind of never ending, and at some point you got to make a decision, right? Like, what, you know, what do I want to sort of, you know, and I think the reason why we take it so personally, it's like, okay, where do I want to, you know, invest my time and my finances to actually purchase this NFT that I'm probably going to represent myself for a very long time. What's your favorite clothing label? Like, Taco, like what do you identify with?
I don't know how to pronounce actually, because it's from Asia. but I think it's Yamamoto is the
Oh,
last name.
Yohji Yamamoto, yeah, and like
Yeah.
Y3 and yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's done the collaborations with Y3. No, great brand. And so then, okay, so if that's a label or a brand that you identify with and that you really appreciate, then what do you think of? What emotions are evoked within you when you think about Yamamoto, right? Like, why is a brand successful? And I think because it probably sparks this very similar emotion in a large group of people, right? And you all have your own interpretation of it, but in general, you're kind of laddering up to this brand. If you take that kind of philosophy and then I applied that to community, I then start to think about, well, if I'm associated with this community versus that community, what emotions or reputation, right, or image is presented by these different communities, these options, right? And so that's kind of like what I went through for a very long time. And I did arrive at Punks because I felt like out of a lot of projects or communities that I was considering, it just felt right for me, and it evoked the right emotional response in myself. When I started to research the people who were also in the community as well, what they stood for, what people were building, what people were talking about, what you were posting about, and it felt right. Yeah. So it's more, it's like it's almost like a brand association in a way.
But about the punks and not even just punks, but just when you pick the PFP and the collection, and even if you're not that much into the collection, you're starting digging into these traits and trying to find it. I really want one day to buy the punk and join the community. But in 2021, I initially picked the one that was really clean. It's a female one with the red lipsticks. And that's it. She's a very, very clean one. And she was like my forever punk. That's how it felt for me.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I don't know why. I just opened the CryptoPunks and then I got lost there because I started getting into the traits. I was like, well, actually, I like when there's this color. And then now I want to find the one that has this trait. And then I found another one. And I kind of like started to find the perfect one with all the traits that I liked.
It froze.
And I spent, I think, an hour doing that till I found the one. Is it going to be like me or completely opposite?
Exactly.
Yeah, I just realized that I don't want her to look exactly like I look. Like, it's not about my hair color and stuff. And it's very interesting to think, how do you see yourself? And there's like a Finsta thing, like people creating the fake accounts, but then they're becoming their actual accounts because that's where they're becoming themselves, like opening themselves. And we even know people in the NFT space that kind of create these personas on social media, on X. But then, and you were saying, like, initially how it's like a two-way street, how it then influences you in real life, and then how it boosts their confidence in real life, how it actually lets them to open up and kind of changes their relationship in real life. And I really find it fascinating. And I think people just underestimate the power of your presence on social media in general, and what you're doing there and what it does to you.
People being able to, funny enough, like be your own self in another skin, but then it actually giving you the confidence in real life, right? Because it's almost like an outlet and another channel to like really be yourself in this other space.
I remember speaking with someone, a person that really completely changed their lifestyle because of the person they were online, and people started seeing them as this person. And because you see yourself, or you define yourself also through other people's eyes or interactions on social media, it really almost, they hold you accountable for becoming this person, or for actually being this person in real life too.
I think we should consider how we're affecting other people's lives online too. And then you're saying like the expectation of, other people's expectation of you based on how you come across and how you've represented yourself. But I think that comes from you. That's what you're putting out there. So, reputation is all about how other people perceive you. but people are perceiving you from your actions, right, and what you say. So we're building up a story of each other online, even though we can't see each other's face or whatever. We're represented by PFPs. Like, we're building up this narrative about who this person is. All the viewer is left with is what you're leaving them.
In general, like what you were saying, like how do you actually build your persona? How do you build the relationships? How do you kind of, but how do you take your soft skills and just take it into digital space and then kind of try to nourish it to create whatever persona you're creating, whether it's going to be a professional expert or it's going to be a degen. You know, degens always also have their own rules how to be a degen.
Sure. Yeah, which is fine. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it takes time. I think it takes time to build up your persona, your brand, just as it takes time to build up your portfolio, your physical brand, who you are. And I think a lot of that comes from, in the physical world, comes through experiences and our reaction to experiences and people's reactions to us and their perceptions of us. And I think same way in the digital space, you can curate it. And I think it's almost like you have another chance. Like, let's say if you feel like you maybe haven't got to where you wanted to be or achieve certain things, in the physical world, not that you should definitely keep going and keep trying, but there are opportunities that have opened up online for people, specifically if we want to start talking about art, right? I think there's less friction with finance, with art. We've heard a lot of stories and seen a lot of people who have really been successful. Yeah, there's been a lot of stories that I've heard and that we've seen where people have really taken themselves out of pretty dark places through art and what NFTs have brought for people's lives. So I think that there's so much value in that, honestly.
When it comes to ownership and how your reputation that you're building up over time is also an asset that potentially you will be able to trade or sell. How do you keep this authenticity, knowing that everything is tradable, if it is?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to trade that, like, you can build up this whole brand and persona, but then, like, once you sell it, then how is that authentic? Because somebody else now is taking over that account. So at that point, you're just deciding to move on, I think, and it's no longer your responsibility to uphold that because you've already let go of the keys.
Do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, like I'm interested how you responded to some things I was saying before, like quite a while ago when I was posting about digital identity, and that seems to be something that you're very focused and passionate about. And I wonder what your perception is and how you are both kind of crafting your digital identity online, and if you even feel like that's like a high level of importance to you right now.
I think in my case I kind of have this kind of a graph on being on social medias. I find like in 2021 I was very active. I kind of built the community and then I was very active, but at some point I felt a little bit overwhelmed by being in the space. It's really interesting that you're looking at the screen, a little screen in your phone or like a desktop, but what's happening in your mind as you're immersed in it kind of becomes a bit overwhelming. So I became a little bit more of an observer for a while and was less interactive. But we had a real small group of people where it's up to 10 people, and now it's kind of bigger, but where I was more active. But as I look at the future, like what I want to build and how I want to continue kind of interact with people, like one of the way of building our own digital personas or our digital presence is this podcast, right? And then as I think about curating my social accounts, I find the need to be authentic in terms of not being one type of thread person or whatever they're doing, but but yeah, like tapping into my interests, because I feel they all come together into this idea of digital identity, of not only from the perspective of, I'm building my digital identity, but just even talking about what digital identity is, and how it can be explored from different directions. So for me, I guess I'm getting back to social media right now and starting interacting, and I feel that something that you were talking about, curating who you're following, who kind of surrounds you in this space. I making some changes because I feel like even the feed, like, what kind of informations you are getting in, like what you're digesting. So it becomes a little bit more aligned with where I want to go and where I want to be. So I think I'm in a process of defining it.
Use lists.
Yeah. Actually, I had access to Pro, they had the Pro decks or something. Yeah. They closed it for, now you have to have a premium and stuff. It was so good because I created different decks, even accounts that I'm maybe not following, but it was kind of like, okay, maybe once in a while I'm checking in. But yeah, like lists are a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do that. You can just curate your following with different categories as well, like you were saying before. It's but yeah, no, I agree, and I think it can be overwhelming, but I think if you sort of even thinking about your mindset, like how much consumption versus creating you're doing online, and trying to balance that, I think if like yourselves, you're doing this, I'm sure you've got many other creative outlets, and being online with a purpose. Of course, there's times when you just want to just look and absorb and consume. But I think if you kind of try and flip that time where, what are you creating to give, to put out there, it can become maybe less overwhelming, because you're not trying to chase, or you're not trying to keep up with everything, because a lot of your time now is diverted into what you're making. Instagram or whatever, you're trying to balance two lives. You've got that life and then what you're doing in the physical, right? And I think the more complex it gets, the more time you might end up putting into your digital personality.
It's a completely outside example, but I was listening to the interview from Julian Casablancas, the Strokes frontman, lead, I would say. So he's not listening to the music randomly. He listens only specific radio accounts that he knows that they're good curated music, and only things that friends that have, he trusts their taste. So he consumes the music of high quality music only, because he says, like, it sits somewhere in my subconsciousness, and when I create 100%. My music, it's going to influence me. So I'm listening only high quality music.
I'm really curious also to listen to your podcasts, to stay up to date with what you're gonna build with that, because I think you will have some really interesting behind the scenes conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's just good. I think as creatives we try to finish the painting, right? And when is it pencils down or put your paintbrush down? And I try to do, the reason why I'm doing this too is to get out of my own way, to honestly make something that, even if it's not perfect, put it out there and iterate. And something I've learned really recently is you've got to be able to put something out to be able to iterate on it and make it better. And you can't hold something so close to your chest and be fearful about putting it out or getting your own voice out there, in whatever means that is. Voice meaning it could be your art, it could be your actual voice, it could be conversations, whatever. I feel like you need to get out of your own way to be able to progress. And so the project is definitely about that for me, and learning how to do more of that, and being able to be comfortable with the first thing you put out may not be your 100% right? But through doing it again and again and again, you're going to go through this refinement process. So when you've taken your episodes, you go through a level of editing, or do you just pretty much take it and it's in its raw form? Like how much refinement do you do?
Because we actually aim to edit as little as possible. That's why we were very selective who we talk with. The thing is, we want to deliver some value, and people should enjoy listening to this and get something out of it. And if you don't get that, it's difficult, and then you have to edit to make sure that only the most interesting parts are staying in the episode.
Kind of cohesive and entertaining to listen.
What software did you use? What other softwares for recording? Because this is something that, well, it's destroying the flow of the conversation in a way. So I feel like Riverside, I either need to change tools or I need to look into what's going on.
Yeah. So a lot of the conversations that I've recorded, luckily they've been local. So I do actually have a podcast studio not too far from here. And I like doing some of these conversations in person, because you get to flow off each other, and the body language and being present with somebody as well. It kind of changes that dynamic a little bit. And then the two that I have recorded remotely has been with Riverside. Yeah, I mean, especially if you're trying to get the conversations up in their rawest form, you're going to have to go in and do a level of editing. I mean, when I look at, honestly, you can also have like the best speaker. Like I had some really good speakers. You start to listen to it, and depending on how perfect or imperfect you want it to be, there's still a level of editing. It does become a tricky topic, especially when it comes to like public speaking, and people want to hear about your experiences at Apple. And Creative Review wanted to talk to me about like design at a streaming network, and I'm like, sorry, I can't. Creative Reviews, like I'd love to do an interview with them, but I couldn't do it because they're. And as soon as I say I can't talk about that, but open to talk about anything else, they're really just trying to get that information out. But it's tricky.
The subject matter only, and not the person behind it. If the person talking about something is not interesting to talk to, then I don't want to talk with them about the subject matter, you know?
Right. It's more about going below the surface and understanding like what drives somebody, I think, and what drives their decision making and what they're interested in. And I think the more you can go below the surface, and I think have more of these conversations, like I like how casual it is.
Well, it's definitely one of my favorite discussions, because we went beyond looking on only Web3 things. The thing that you are saying, and you're trying to deliver with your podcast, I honestly want to listen to it, because I learn from things like that. And like even my question was while you were talking, I was actually wanted to ask you like what your experience of even interviewing them, and do you learn how to change? Because I think every time we do an episode, we always try to go back and think what we from our side can improve.
I think as a host, what I've realized is as much as maybe I don't want to be scripted, it's nice to have those bullet points to be able to like keep some form of flow right to the conversation. And some of the feedback I got and I gave myself is it's nice to, again, yours is kind of different because you want it to be like this more casual conversation, but there's a way to kind of build a framework around a conversation, and not necessarily I have to ask these questions, right, and repeat the same kind of mechanism for every single guest. But you can build some sort of framework, like do you want to learn about somebody through a case study of something that they experienced is one thing, and that could be really interesting because now the guest is now bringing your audience into their world through a case study of something that they experienced in their life, right, and an experience or a topic. What is the topic, or what is the thing that you want your audience to walk away from at the end of that conversation, and how can you pull that out of the person that you're interviewing to make sure that they walk away with that? And if they walk away with more than that, because the conversation's gone here, there and around, great. But I think being able to pull it back and try to have a target of what message you want somebody to leave with, or what value proposition you're trying to give with each episode, I think is something to consider, you know. Because then I think then you said at the beginning with your podcast before, you felt like perhaps you were speaking on the same things, but you noticed that it was quite narrow. And even with my own research of digital fashion, like I was posting a lot about digital fashion and beauty and stuff like that, but then because it's so niche and so early, you kind of there's not a ton of material to sustain something for that long until there's something new, or now maybe you want to focus on different artists. So I think being able to diversify what you're talking about as well, which you are doing now, you realize that from the older experiment.
It's important, and I guess for me the favorite part is basically connecting with people. It's actually how we actually started our podcast, the first one. We were like, we are not on these events, we can't go there, so how can we connect with these people?
How can we talk to them? Learn about their experiences. And I think the technology is great. I mean, we weren't able to do this a few years ago, so to be able to actually meet different people and you kind of gauge like what kind of interests you might share, and just to connect on that for like an hour and a half, I think it's great. I see like the conversations that I have sometimes. I'm in a restaurant and I speak about this in I think the first episode, where it's like I'm sitting down having a conversation with somebody that I really respect, and that I might be learning from, and I'm like, oh wow, like I wish there were 100,000 people that could have heard this conversation, because I learned and took away so much from it. And how can I get more people to hear this message? And that you got to have a platform to be able to do that. But it was actually like something that was really bugging me. I'm like, oh man, like I left this conversation with like these gems, and I wish that I was able to like know this when I was like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because it would have helped me in my life or some of my decision making, right? Enhance some of my decision making, so maybe I could have either be in a better place, right? So there's that kind of knowledge that I think is just so valuable to share, and you really only get that when you have those conversations over dinner or coffee or something where you're relaxed with someone. But then the key thing with being the host is how do you create that relaxed atmosphere and be able to get that same if you don't know the person, being able to extract that same kind of conversation from them when you don't know them. It's just starting off cold, and there's only so much research you can do until the person comes up or comes to the studio, and it's just the preparation I think is the trickiest part of that.
It's like maybe one question that I have is of cracking people. There's a different types of people. Sometimes some are a little bit closed ones, and you kind of feel that you have to relax them somehow. Did you even it's not even on the question, I think it's in real life as well, like when you meet people, like even on the coffee, or like it was a first time meeting or something, like how do you open up people? Do you have some insights like from your experience?
There's many things that happen when you first meet someone, right? And I think sometimes people are not very good listeners, and I think I always try to practice being a good listener. And for somebody to be able to open up with you, you've got to be able to maybe ask, what are your questions, what are your prompts that don't just lead to like yes no answers, or like how can you be more engaging. And I think giving somebody the platform to be able to speak and feel comfortable with speaking to you, and you're not the one that's like over in that first meeting and trying to like just monopolize the conversation, because I feel like in those situations sometimes people will close up and will not speak and be very comfortable with just listening to you. And there's a skill in being able to have somebody be comfortable to just speak, and I think a lot of that comes from there's body language cues. We mimic a lot, right? Like if you go for your glass of water, someone else goes for your glass. I mean, there's a lot of like very basic level human things that you can actually learn that you won't look at conversations the same way, or you won't look at the first interactions with people the same way, right? And when two people are very comfortable in a conversation or in a first interaction, you end up mirroring. Like if I lean back, the person may lean back. Like you can start to like see how comfortable this person is in your presence, right? And then you've got, if you're, I mean, it's just like you're on a date or something, and like, then you start to the sort of like little physical touch cues. I mean, you know all about that. So it's like there's all of these small things that are basic across most people. And I think I've really started to try to understand a lot more of this too, because at work I lead a pretty big team, and so there's a lot of different personalities, and that comes anywhere, right? Like even your friend groups, many different personalities, and so how I may address or coach one person is not the same how I may coach and address situations with the other person, and multiply that by like 10, 15 interactions with different people during the day, leading a team or working with cross-functional partners where you're communicating with people outside of your immediate group. You have to know how to navigate different personalities and have people be comfortable in your presence, right? And there's also a key thing about I think I wrote that the other day, about being very aware of your influence and your presence in a room, and not taking advantage of even your position, because how you react, the whole room can react. If it's a hierarchical thing and you're at a level above people, how you respond and how you react will have a direct effect on how those people react and receive, right? And so going into conversations the same way, right? Like you can control the dynamic of the conversation if you want to have that presence, but just be aware of like things you do, your body language, what you say. This is the longest it's gone without freezing. When we're not even in the main conversation.
It was about time. Oh no, now it happened. Fuck. It's
I have to do it all again.
It happens. So yeah, I think it's also midnight for you now, right?
It is, yeah. Time for bed.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and wake up and get to the gym in the morning. But yeah, I'm glad we did this and we caught up. It's nice to meet you both. Well, Taco again, but like nice to meet you both in somewhat in person. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for joining, and wish you
have a great night. Yeah. And enjoy your day, and I hope you get some sunshine.
Thank you, and I hope you got something out of the conversation as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's always like it's very therapeutic, I think, to talk and be asked questions that you're not necessarily prepared for. It makes you think. Sometimes you sort of like, let me get my train of thought and bring it back. So it's a good mental exercise, definitely, especially sometimes being on the receiving end of being interviewed. Especially like a lot of the time I'm presenting, and it's very structured, presentations, and you're going in there for a specific purpose. So to have these somewhat like unstructured conversations are great. Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me of one last thing, is that I have to get back into improv. I'm really into improv, and I want to do some classes again. So
if it froze for a few seconds, I didn't catch the last bit.
I think it's the Riverside telling me to shut up and to end the shut up.
I'm glad we finally got to do it. All right, speak soon.